Yes, thank you. The recording is in progress. We also hope that you will be able to just define the components of a multi-tiered, multi-dimensional system of supports. And so MTSS with the school counselor, they're did I say it right? Multi-tiered, multi-domain system of supports. And then we also hope that you'll be able to just articulate your role as the school counselor in your district, in your building, in the MTSS that is happening. So those are our session outcomes for today. We would like to do a little pre-survey. And so if you would be so kind as to take, it's very quick, you can use the bit.ly here on the slide, or if you would like to use your phone, you can do that as well. And just take a minute here and do a quick pre-survey. How would you rate your current understanding of today's outcomes and learning objectives? If someone could give me a quick thumbs up or an it's okay to move on, I'll know that you have had enough time there to do the quick pre-survey. Good to move on? Okay. All right. Thank you. Okay. All right. And one more as we get started item here. We just wanted to know how familiar you are with MTSS. And some of us here on the Zoom today, it might be not at all familiar. We might be thinking, you know what, I hear our early literacy teachers talking about that, but I'm not sure what they're talking about. Or you might be a 5. You might be very familiar. You might be on the leadership team. You might be really, really embedded in that work. And so just to help us get started here, would you please give us a 0 through a 5 in the chat? All right, as expected, we have a whole range, right? We have a whole range from those who are not at all familiar to those who are very familiar. So we are going to do our best to meet your needs today as we learn some more about MTSS. All right, I am going to turn things over to Scotty.
Thank you, Jackie. Can you hear me okay? Awesome. Okay. I always think like fingers crossed when we do some of these Zoom things, right? Good morning, everyone. I'm Scotty Hagensick from Keystone AEA, and I am our school counseling contact. And Jackie mentioned one of our objectives for learning today is to really center our conversations around what are the key aspects of an early warning system. So today we're going to talk about what are those indicators that can help school counselors educate students who may be at risk, and how do we start to provide those necessary supports based on the data that is available to us. So we'll also have some conversations and learning around how we can be proactive in taking action on that assessment data that's available to us in terms of social emotional learning, attendance, achievement, and intervention data. And something that's really exciting about school counselors and the people in our Zoom space and live today, is that school counselors are leaders and change agents in this work. And when it comes to supporting student outcomes for all of the students across the state of Iowa, we have an opportunity to utilize this data and really promote high outcomes for success for all students. Okay, Jackie, I'm ready. Thank you. One of the resources we wanted to share with you today was the Get the Facts printables and infographics that were recently sent out by the American School Counseling Association. And this printable, if you're on the slide deck, and I see Jackie is putting the slide deck link in the chat again, there is also a link to this infographic if you would like to use this as a way to advocate for your role with your stakeholders. So I'd like to give you a moment just to process through the information that is on this Get the Facts printable. And when you've had some time to digest the content here, I'd like you to think about what's one piece of data you already use as a school counselor that may be in this printable, or maybe one piece of data you'd like to take action on, and then drop that in the chat. So what's a piece of data you're already using that's maybe represented here, or one that you'd really like to start leveraging? Okay, I'm checking the chat. I'm seeing attendance, achievement data, so grades, that'd be a testing data, office discipline referrals, another grades idea. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks, Christine. Achievement data. Okay, Jill, grades and attendance. Every 2 weeks, we look at grades and attendance. Awesome. So lots of common types of data that we can use. And school counselors really focus on outcomes for students in the areas of behavior, attendance, and achievement. So that is so exciting to see all of those ideas that are readily available to us that we can utilize to support student outcomes. Okay, Jackie, thank you. All right, we are at a point in our learning today where we're going to start to uncover what is MTMDSS. So we know MTSS is multi-tiers of systems of support. So what does that MD in the middle of our acronym stand for? And this short video is 3 minutes long from Trish Hatch at Hatching Results, and will give us a little bit more information about what exactly do we mean when we say MTMDSS, and how does that relate to school counseling? So we'll go ahead and jump over to this video. I think I see it right at the bottom of your screen there, Jackie, on the bottom left. There's a play button if you scroll down maybe just a little bit. It's kind of hiding down there.
Jackie, I think you'll have to unmute too.
Yep, Jackie, I don't know if it's just us in Keystone. We don't have any sound right now.
System of supports.
All right, friends, I'm going to start over, okay? My apologies. If it were a perfect Zoom day, that would be something new for me. So here we go. I think the sound is on. Here we go.
Hi, this is Trish Hatch, and today we're going to talk about the multi-tiered, multi-domain system of supports, or MTMDSS. As educators, we're familiar with the multi-tiered system of support, or MTSS, which focuses on students' academic and behavioral needs. But for school counselors who focus on 3 domains, academic, college and career, and social emotional development, we need a more robust system. We need a multi-tiered, multi-domain system of supports, or MTMDSS. In MTMDSS, school counselors ensure that all students receive the instruction and support they need to grow academically, develop socially and behaviorally, and to prepare for post-secondary options. In this system, activities, instruction, and intervention services are grouped into tiers, ranging from Tier 1 services, a core program of universal supports that apply to everyone, to Tier 2 services, or targeted interventions, which would typically only apply to approximately 20% of students. And finally, to Tier 3 services, intentional interventions, which would typically apply to between 5 and 10% of students. MTMDSS provides a data-driven approach to determining which of these levels of interventions or tiers are appropriate for any individual student. Under MTMDSS, Tier 1 encompasses agreed upon services that all students receive, such as standards and competency-based school counselor core curriculum lessons, individual student planning, which includes 4- and 6-year academic and post-secondary plans, and district and school-wide agreed upon activities and events. Tier 1 is designed to be comprehensive, preventative, developmental, and proactive. Tier 2 is designed for students who are exhibiting barriers to learning, struggling academically, or are deserving of additional supports. It uses database decision-making to select at-risk indicators such as attendance, behavior, credit deficiency, and post-secondary readiness data. Targeted intervention data elements, grade levels, and timeframes are queried to determine which students qualify for interventions. Depending on the student, Tier 2 interventions may include short-term individual or small group counseling, progress monitoring, consultation, collaboration, and or referrals to resources within or outside the school building. Tier 3 services are designed for students experiencing emergency or crisis response events, or to support students with needs that remain unresolved within Tier 2. School counselors provide short-term solution-focused counseling, consultation, and when appropriate, referral to additional resources. Over time, MTMDSS allows school counselors to spend more time implementing proactive Tier 1 action plans and less time engaged in reactive Tier 2 and Tier 3 activities. The ultimate goal is to ensure all students achieve their greatest potential and graduate ready for post-secondary success.
All right, I just love that quick 3-minute snapshot of what MTMDSS can look like for school counselors to be preventative and proactive in our work and utilize that continuum of support to support our students. So I'd like to invite you at this time, we've just watched that short video. Feel free to, in the chat, or come off mute if you'd like to share your voice today. What's maybe a key takeaway after you've watched that video? So we'll pause here, drop something in the chat. Feel free to come off mute. It's a key takeaway from Trisha's message today. Thanks, Ashley. So just that critical importance of being preventative as opposed to reactive. And we'll also talk today, as Dave gets started in a few moments, the difference between being responsive and reactive as school counselors. Thanks, Christine. Spending our time in that Tier 1 or universal setting. Hey, I'm seeing some other consistent ideas. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you, Andrea. Yes, absolutely. So even coming into that multiple domain idea as well. Okay, you may be familiar with the concept of PLCs or professional learning communities in your building or schools. And on this slide, these are the 4 guiding questions for professional learning communities that your teachers and educators may use when they're having conversations around academic standards for students and how we support students in meeting those academic standards and reaching those benchmarks and proficiency levels. And on the surface, these questions may seem pretty simple. However, these questions have been shown through research, and there's evidence to support that when we focus these questions for our students, we are really able to support them in achieving high standards of learning. And we have a high impact on their learning when we center our conversations and data and actions around these 4 questions. And one of the major tenets of belief in a PLC is that students can learn and achieve at high levels. And we can use that multi-tiered system of support to provide foundational universal instruction, as well as our assessment data to determine when do students need additional support in order to achieve a standard, and how are they showing us that they're demonstrating an academic, behavior, career, college, or social emotional skill. So Jackie, if we go to the next slide, we're going to start to really dig into that first question of what do we want our students to know and be able to do? And we answer that question by using the Ask a Student standards. So if you wouldn't mind using your reaction button or just giving a thumbs up, how many people are already familiar with the Ask a Student standards? Okay, I've got some thumbs up here live in our room. I'm seeing some on our Zoom rooms. Okay, awesome. So when teachers talk about what do we want students to know and be able to do, from a school counseling lens, we can use the Ask a Student standards to help us get at the idea of what knowledge, attitudes, and skills do we want our students to possess. And this is really going to be an extremely supportive and data-driven piece of our conversation when we talk about Tier 1 or universal. And as we get into our next few slides, we'll be able to see that those school counseling core curriculum lessons are able to help us address those student standards with a large number of students in a short amount of time and be very effective with the time that we do have. The Ask a Student standards, can help guide the development, delivery, and assessment of those 3 direct domains that Trish Hatch talked about, the social, emotional, academic, and career and college domains. So as you start thinking about your universal delivery of those Ask a Student standards, this might look different depending on the grade levels that you serve. So for example, at an elementary level, some of our school counselors may be able to provide universal or Tier 1 or core curriculum. When we say those words, we're talking about that Tier 1 foundational support for school counselors. They may, elementary school counselors may have a once a week, 30-minute time slot that they're able to go to every grade level and deliver that direct instruction. At a middle school or a secondary level, that may look different. Perhaps you have once a month and you're able to go into a 42-minute class period and deliver universal instruction that is based off of the Ask a Student standards. So we'll pause here and we'd like you to think about the fact that there are 36 Ask a Student standards, and we know that this is delivered across that preschool through 12th grade sequential spectrum. So kindergarten students are not going to get all 36 standards and then get them again in first grade and again in second grade. So school counselors are really able to think about the developmental needs and the data that they have to determine what student standards are most appropriate and how we address them across that preschool through 12th grade spectrum. So think about this question here on our slide. How much time do you currently have to deliver that core curriculum to all students? And then please drop that in the chat. What does that currently look like for you? And do you believe that that is meeting the needs of your students? Do you have enough time? Seeing Aaron in the chat, 30 minutes per class here at a K-5 level. Thank you, every other week. K-6, each class gets 30 minutes. Thanks, Hannah, 35 minutes. Okay, so I'm seeing some consistent ideas, especially with our elementary folks. Okay, I see Melissa, you have grades 7 and 8, 30 minutes per week, and maybe looks a little bit different at the high school. Okay, seeing some comments about at the high school level, that can maybe be even more challenging to secure some of that time. I do encourage all of you to think about perhaps there are events or activities or strategies that you are using that are universal in nature, that you can run those activities and events through that Ask a Student Standard lens. I'm thinking of a FAFSA completion night, or if there is career information services, or if you have a career information system that is provided to all students, that would be a great way to link that back to the Ask a Student Standards. And it might look a little bit different than going in and providing a 45-minute lesson and going to every individual classroom. Okay, I'm seeing some more ideas continuing to flow in. Okay, thank you. So feel free to keep checking that chat. There's a lot of great ideas, keeping our conversation going. Thanks, Jackie. So when we start to think about the fact that there are 36 Ask a Student Standards, and these are delivered in a developmentally appropriate way, and they're based on identified needs and our program's goals as school counselors. So that first step, we can really start to think about what need exists. What challenges currently exist around student outcomes within my school and my district? And we center that discovery around achievement, attendance, and discipline data. We can also utilize our school improvement goals, strategic plans. Oftentimes there's some data indicators in there as well that can help identify needs and challenges that exist. And you might see on Jackie's slide here, that second question. So what data and supplemental information supports the idea that this is a need? So perhaps your district has a goal of 95% achievement. All students will work towards 95% daily attendance. I'm sorry, not achievement, attendance. So perhaps your building has a goal of all students will achieve a 95% attendance rate across the school year. So you might have that data point of how many students are currently at a 95% attendance rate, which students are currently not yet there. So that starts your data point and your need area. And then you're able to collect some additional supplemental information through interviewing teachers, considering policies or systemic frameworks that are possibly contributing to that area of need. So you might potentially interview some teachers around, okay, so we're seeing some of our students that are at that 95% attendance rate, and some of them are not. I wonder what barriers are potentially present. Perhaps some of your students are picking up breakfast in the morning, and then they're arriving to first hour tardy because they are in a long breakfast line. Or maybe there is a bus route that I've seen some schools where a bus may have struggles getting to the building on time, and it's truly not a student issue, but perhaps an issue with, we might need to just rework some of our schedules and plans for our bus and transit routes. So school counselors can really start to dig down to what are the deeper issues with that supplemental information that helps me understand what are the barriers and obstacles that may need to be addressed or removed in order to support movement towards that positive student outcome. There might also be specific developmental stages that we need to keep in mind. Perhaps you're starting to notice that your students are in 6th grade or 7th grade, starting to get their own cell phones or devices. And that has maybe caused an uptick in bullying or harassment of reports, or possibly technology violations as you think about discipline referrals. And school counselors are able to really keep a pulse on what are the developmental needs of our students, what data exists for me, and then how do I start to gather more information to better understand how to address this need. Okay, so we're going to do a little bit of practicing around that same idea of, let's pretend our building is called the ABC building, aims for all students to achieve a 95% daily attendance rate. And if you're on the slide deck here, that blue font is linked to the Ask a Student Standards document. And if you have them open as well, feel free to open that up in another window. We'd like you to drop in the chat, what is the potential Ask a Student Standard that aligns with this area of need? And there might be more than one, but which one maybe stands out to you? Thanks, Courtney. I saw you just drop that in the chat. What might be a standard that aligns to students achieving a 95% daily attendance rate. I'll give you a moment to open that up and do some browsing. Thanks, Sherry. Students will develop long and short-term academic, career, and social emotional goals. All right, SMS 1, Jacob says responsibility for self and actions. Absolutely. So we started with identifying the need. What's the data that I have? What's the supplemental information? Now I can start to prioritize that standard for how I can begin to deliver that instruction and then assess the development of those skills and attitudes and knowledge for students. Okay, so keep those standards coming in the chat as you're exploring. So the next part that school counselors begin to tackle in that universal tier is, once I've identified my priority standard, how am I going to deliver this instruction? What will students be able to do, believe, or know as a result of this universal support? And when we write our student objectives, we keep them action-oriented, they are short and concise, and they are always framed around students will what? So in the chat, I'd like to invite you to share what might be a potential student objective, learning objective, for what will students be able to know, believe, or do after you deliver this core curriculum. So we're thinking about that standard that is responsibility for self, social maturity. What will students be able to do? So go ahead and complete that sentence and drop that in the chat. What might be a potential learning objective? You're also welcome to come off mute as well. I love to hear some voices that aren't just mine. Students will be able to identify skills to manage time. Absolutely. Students will be able to identify how long they need to get ready in the morning. Yeah, so thinking about what's the developmental appropriateness of that learning objective. For a third grade student, it may be that the skill is, I can pick my clothing out the night before. I can set an alarm clock. I can pack my book bag. It might look different at a middle school or high school level because of the developmental fit. Aaron, thanks. Yours is very specific. Students will be able to identify 6 ways they can demonstrate responsibility at school or home. Absolutely. So now what you've done is you've really set yourself up for our next slide, Jackie. We've prioritized that standard that's based on a need. We've written our learning objectives, and now we're ready to really assess. And when we engage in this process, this really lends legitimacy and credibility to our role as professional school counselors. And it represents that connection we share with other teachers and educators in our building. We utilize a very similar process to support our students in demonstrating success and proficiency in the student standards, the ASCA student standards, in a similar way that our teachers work towards those Common Core standards. So we've identified our standard, we've written our learning objectives. Now we're ready to base our pre and post assessment questions right off of those learning objectives. So if I open back up our chat, I see ideas that students will be able to identify their morning and bedtime routines. That might be your pre-assessment question that you ask. Do you have a morning routine? Do you know what your bedtime routine is? And you can ask those pre and post assessment questions before you go in and teach or deliver that instruction and get a sense of how many students are currently able to do that. And then reassess at the end of that activity or lesson, how many students have moved the needle and can now do it and weren't able to at the beginning of your lesson. So I'm going to pause here and just inquire with our group. What is your current experience, or how have you found the use of pre and post assessments successful in your role? What helps you develop quality pre and post assessment questions? Any other insights you might have around that universal support that we've been talking about so far? We kind of went fast and furious through unpacking the standards, like very brief, very fast. Okay, I see a comment in there. I use pre and post assessments in my targeted social skill groups. And Dave is going to get right into that supplemental and tier 2 supports next. Absolutely. The I can statements through CASEL. Yes, this can help guide our questions as well. So I'm hoping that this fast and furious dive into the Ask a Student standards helps to give you a little bit of an understanding or provide some more evidence for what you're already doing to really help take those standards from a document and make them actionable and live them out in your role as a school counselor across the grade levels. Okay, so I think we're just about ready to get you into some breakout rooms and get you guys talking for a little bit. So Jackie is going to take us over to a Jamboard that we'd like to invite you to participate in for about the next 10 minutes or so. So in a moment, you'll have an opportunity to choose a breakout room that most connects with your current role. So there'll be a couple breakout rooms for elementary counselors, middle level counselors, secondary counselors, and so on. Once you're in your breakout room, we'd like you to navigate to this Jamboard and think about what are your tier 1 supports provided for all students across the 3 domains that school counselors focus on. And we'd like each school counselor to add 2 sticky notes and sort them based on the domain that they fit in. So if you are providing a tier 1 support that is academic in nature, you can drop it over there on a yellow sticky note. If you're thinking about a career or college lesson, activity, or universal support, you can put those on green stickies. And then blue stickies are for social emotional. So 2 stickies, you choose and then sort where they most fit in those 3 domain areas. Okay, I'm going to pause here. What questions do you have either in the chat or unmuted about what to do in breakout rooms for the next 10 minutes? I sure can explain that again, Dave. Yes. Okay, so we'll be hopping into breakout rooms based on your level. So in this example, elementary school counselors will be on this Jamboard, and your breakout room is going to be having some conversations around what are the universal supports I already provide in my school counseling program. And there are 3 domain areas that school counselors focus on. So you can add 2 sticky notes on your Jamboard that are color coded that match the colors on the Jamboard. So academic is yellow. You can see that up there. Thanks for asking me to clarify that again. And Courtney dropped the link to the Jamboard in the chat. Thank you. We'll put you in breakout rooms in a minute, or you guys can just navigate to 1, 2 and stay here. Thanks, Dave. So breakout rooms, the different titles for the breakout rooms are listed in the chat as well. And go with the one that feels like it most fits you today. I know we have school counselors across multiple levels.
Scotty, could you just scroll across the top so that they can see the titles of those, so they can see how to go from elementary to K-8 to 6-12 and so on?
Thanks, Jackie. Okay. Okay, it looks like there's quite a few people on our Jamboard today.
Yeah, we might need to make a copy of this Jamboard and offer a second edition.
Okay, thank you. All right. While we are doing that, Jackie, Courtney, and Dave, should we go ahead and start opening those breakout rooms and people can head out and have some conversations for about 10 minutes?
Yes. Do we want, how many breakout rooms do we want?
I'll build them right now. I'm going to title the rooms based on what we just put in the chat.
Okay, thank you. all the details that I've never had a Jamboard say there's too many people on it, so.
I just opened up all the rooms and those are titled elementary counselor, K-8, 6-12, high school, and K-12 counselors. So I'm putting the chat there. Just go into the room that feels like the best fit for your role or your position.
Thank you, Dave.
And Jackie, I see 9:10 on my clock, so maybe pull everyone back together about 9:20 or so. Does that sound okay?
Yep, that sounds great. 9:20.
Okay, thank you. Right. Welcome back. Looks like we have everybody back. Jill. Yeah, you might just need to mute yours. Okay, thank you for taking some time to hop into some Jamboard rooms and do some breakout conversations. I am going to, Jackie, if you wouldn't mind just bringing the slides up one more time and we can hop back over to that Jamboard, do a little bit of debriefing, and then we'll hand it over to Dave. Thanks for helping navigate for us, Jackie.
Do you want the Jamboard up or do you want the slideshow up?
If we could get to the Jamboard, that would be great.
Okay.
We would just like to take a little bit of time to process this activity. Sorry, I'm making you switch all over, Jackie. I'd like to just process this activity as a little bit of a heat map and start to identify some trends and themes that might exist across the different levels in terms of what does Tier 1 support look like at an elementary level? What about K-8, middle school, secondary, 6-12? I know we have K-12 school counselors as well who are across that entire sequence. Okay, so our elementary school counselors, taking a look at your Jamboard here. In your academic area, I'm seeing that use of FAST data. Absolutely. So we can look at that literacy and math data as part of our early warning system and help provide support for students in terms of accessing that instruction in literacy and math. Zello as a career information system, part of that career and college domain. And then social emotional weekly classroom lessons. Absolutely. Okay, Sabers or My Sabers as a data point. Okay, so I'm seeing some data sources and I'm seeing some lessons and direct services as well as part of our Ask a Model framework as we talk about direct services. Okay, elementary school counselors, or K-8 as well. I see some ideas here. What else can we know from your conversation? Feel free to drop something in the chat. Tell us about how your conversation went, areas of commonality you noticed. K-8 weekly lessons during WIN time. Thanks, Jackie. Okay, so I am noticing too with that 612 Jamboard that there are more sticky notes in that college and career domain. So as we think about developmental needs of our students, oftentimes in elementary, those blue sticky notes are very heavy. There's a lot of social emotional direct services going on. There's also some college and career and then the academic as well. But we'll hear that shift that as we get into the secondary and middle school levels, the career and college needs start to become more prominent and are addressed in a more systematic way as well. Okay, process through a few more. Give you a second just to take a second and reflect on what you see here. So high school counselors. Okay, some in all three domains. Really focusing on the whole child across all of these grade level Jamboards. Okay, we can keep going, Jackie. Thank you. Okay. DBT, mindful teens. In that social emotional, second step in the K-12. Okay. So there's certainly a connection between what data helps support how we identify needs, and then that leads to our delivery of those direct student services in Tier 1. So before I hand it off to Dave to talk about Tier 2, would anyone like to come off mute or drop anything in the chat? Tell us a little bit about your breakout rooms or anything that is kind of mulling around in your mind at this point.
I thought it might be, I was surprised that on the Jamboards that things were pretty spread out between all three domains. I thought high school might be a little more heavy in one area than elementary or K6, K8 counselors. So that surprised me in a great way.
Thanks, Jackie. All right, I hope you were able to meet some colleagues that are in similar roles across the state as you, possibly get some new ideas and make connections around what that universal tier looks like. So Dave, without any further ado, I think we can hand it over to you and get back to our slide deck.
Thanks, Scotty. You know, I was reflecting as folks were putting some things in the chat earlier about what they were doing at Tier 1 and how many minutes they were doing. And I noticed that a lot of those happened to be responses from folks who self-identified as an elementary level counselor. So one thing that I would encourage, especially our secondary folks who struggle to get access to students in the classroom, just because of the way that the scheduling works, try to reframe your thinking around Tier 1 and how you can maybe use some quote Tier 2 strategies to get to students at the Tier 1 level, you know, small groups and things like that. But the primary idea being there that Tier 1 is something that all students get because they live and they breathe and they come to your building, right? So I remember, and I don't know who to attribute this to, and Sue could probably help me out here, but I remember hearing many years ago in my career that individual student planning doesn't have to happen individually. You know, there's ways that we can get at just being creative about how we think through the tiers.
I think that's right in the Ask a Model.
Okay, there we go. And Jackie, if you could bring up that slide deck there for moving to Tier 2. One thing that I'll start with here is as you move from Tier 1 to Tier 2, using that ask, attitude, skills, and knowledge to really identify what attitude, skills, and knowledge that you need reinforcement and for which students. In the video, we saw kind of how Trish talked about querying things to identify which students need what. And from a Tier 2 standpoint, this is coming out of our core curriculum or our core content area, particularly the action plans that support that. So looking at the small groups as they relate to your core curriculum, I make the academic analogy a lot where, you know, if students struggle to meet a certain academic standard, they're identified for additional intervention and support. So, you know, I kind of believe that if the content that you're providing students is so critical for their growth and development as a student, it's critically important that all students are successful and they all possess the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to meet those standards. You can go ahead and skip ahead one, Jackie. One thing that I also kind of be a stickler on when it comes to assessing students to identify who needs which levels of intervention is identifying not only which students need it, but then what is the intervention? And I hear this a lot from counselors who are saying like, well, I know which kids need what, but I need some resources to figure out how to meet some of those needs. And we're going to go through and share those a little bit later in my section here. But one thing that I want to caution you as you look towards identifying students and making interventions is to be sure that your interventions are evidence-based and or research-based. And specifically, we've been using attendance here as kind of the analogy as we've gone through several of these, and to be careful about not using what I would call notifying families as your intervention. So I'll give you a quick analogy here. So if we use the ISASP and we said our intervention for students who are struggling is math, as we send a letter home to the parents letting them know they're struggling in math, that's not really an intervention and that wouldn't sound like one. But when we look at interventions for attendance, we often say we call home, we send a letter, we keep track of how many times we called home and how many times we sent a letter. So we're going to get into a little bit more about what types of interventions can fit with that knowledge, attitude, and skills. Go ahead and skip ahead, Jackie. So when we get into moving from small groups to individual student planning and responsive services, it's the same idea here that when you get to the end of your small group, the goal is that students are not in those groups all year. They are in there for very specific content. They are fluid, just like academic intervention groups. I've had several counselors share with me that one of the strategies that works for them is to have some sort of ongoing schedule. So there's a time built into their weekly and monthly calendars for tier 2 interventions. So for example, one of our districts has a bi-weekly counseling lessons in the classroom. So they get essentially 20 lessons during the year. And on the alternate weeks is when they run the small groups for the students who are struggling to meet some of those outcomes. So keeping in mind how we move from tier 1 to tier 2, what data are we using and assessing, and how are you developing your groups? And if you're developing your groups now solely by teacher recommendation or parent referral, that's one way to do them, but that's different than a tier 2 small group action plan. That really was going to fall more into responsive services. And just being mindful about making sure that all of your small groups are not responsive services. And, again, making sure that you're directing your counseling program and that you're not allowing your groups to be populated by other people's needs, right? So looking at data and what types of supports that students need. I think when we get into some data work later in the year, responsive services, especially in the tier 3 level, can really eat up your daily time, right? Where you're just with crisis response services. It seems like they dominate some of our time, and working towards doing that a little bit more intentionally. Go ahead and skip ahead, Jackie. So we're gonna push ahead 2 here and get to how are we going to put all this together? What are your tier 1 activities? How do you assess for those activities? We've talked a little bit about how you might assess for tier 1, tier 2, and how do you respond to those? So we're going to share an example on the next slide. And ideally what you're going to do here is you have your own program goals. I'm sharing with you an example, but this doesn't necessarily need to be your example. But the idea here that picking one of your goals, and in this case, using a building who had 37% of their students were chronically absent. So the first step is to identify whether or not, is that a tier 1 issue or not? What do you think? Throw in the chat. Is this a tier 1 or a tier 2 issue we need to address? All right, I see tier 1 kind of coming through. Aaron, Jess, Missy. So it seems like we've got some universal agreement, right? And Dave commented that seems like a really high percentage. So what is the tip off that that's more of a tier 1 issue? Anyone want to unmute and just share? And what should it be? Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Melissa. What would be the rate at which we would say it's not a tier 1? This is kind of a getting back to some of that MTSS 101. Yeah. So like 15 to 20 is kind of the ideal there, right? So you've got about 80 to 85% of students should meet the expectation. And if they're not, then you move, if they are, then you're moved to a tier 2. So when you look at it in this building's case, you've got a very high rate of students who are chronically absent. So this would be something that the building would want to address at the tier 1 level until that data starts falling. And, there's ways that you can get around that. We're going to talk about some resources and where you can find some materials to support lessons, because I've often heard, I don't know how I can teach attendance. And we'll get to that because there are some strategies and some resources to do that. So in this particular example, we've got some process data that would say, okay, I'm going to do 3 lessons. They're going to be 20 minutes apiece, and that's going to be during some sort of weekly 9th grade seminar, homeroom, whatever that might be. So again, so your data points that you're going to want to collect on the perception side are the attitude is, do students even believe that attendance matters? I mean, I've known a lot of students who've gotten 30-40% of the time they're absent and they still have a 3.9 GPA. So it's going to be really hard to get that student to believe that attendance matters or is important. And then you've got something like a skill where they actually know. I used to joke about I came across some old curriculum. We talked about bringing in alarm clocks and teaching students how to set alarm clocks. And now that's kind of turned into helping students figure out how to use their phone and not forgetting to turn the volume up before they go to bed. But then also basic things like, do students know how to start, what time school actually starts? And these are things that you can assess from students, and your intervention would be different based on whether or not they have an attitude or a belief that attendance isn't critically important. That's a very different intervention than students who may not know when first period starts, and they may not know that, when the bus drops them off or something like that. So there's different interventions based on the perception data. Go ahead, Jackie. But really the big idea here is that we're trying to get to the achievement related and the achievement outcome. So the goal here is that if the achievement related outcome would be that we increase the percentage of students who are not chronically absent, right? And because we're doing that, we're trying to increase, and this is just a high school example, we're trying to increase the number of students who graduate or percentage. We're trying to increase grades. We're trying to decrease course failures. We're trying to increase credit accrual towards graduation. So there's some outcomes that we would ultimately try to be supporting with this this type of tiered intervention structure. So hopefully that all makes sense. I'm going to go on to the resources page next. Actually, Jackie, could you do me a favor, if you don't mind? I believe I can share my screen. So if you wouldn't mind pausing, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And I want to draw your attention to 2 key resources here that will be helpful to you in this work. So the What Works Clearinghouse is kind of the gold standard for interventions and support. And you'll notice that there are some pretty, obvious ones here at the top: literacy, math, and science. Those were probably some of the first. But we do have some in here related to behavior. We do have some in here related to, on track to graduate. We do have things in here for post-secondary. So I'm just going to click into one. And it will show you different types of interventions, the grade level that intervention may support. And then you can just really dig into some of these. I'm going to skip back here and go into behavior. This gets into a little bit more SEL related stuff. And again, you can filter this and see, like here's a social skills training curriculum that's passed the What Works Clearinghouse test for evidence base for pre-K students, or here's this early risers. This is an attendance one for helping students. So again, if you have not dug into this resource, there's a lot of really great strategies in here, especially with regards to interventions at all three of the tiers. The other one that I think is a really great resource, and hopefully, are you seeing the attendance work screen now? Am I sharing still the right tab? Thank you. Okay, so they have this link where on chronic attendance here, where they get into how to address some of this. And they have these tiered intervention, and they have some strategies related to how we might do that. But again, it's a really great resource for addressing the varied reasons why a student may be not attending school. And that really is one of the keys of that site, is getting into, there's a lot of different reasons why students may not be in school, and our intervention needs to be aligned to the reason why they're not there, as opposed to just a blanket intervention. So again, using your data that you collect and your attitude, skills, and knowledge to determine what supports a student or a family might need there. Okay, Jackie, if you could go back and just reshare the slide deck, please. And the last one that I had on there that I'm not gonna go through is the Castle site. There's all sorts of great resources on there as well, but those are I thought these were linked. I believe they're linked in the slide deck. So I think these might have just been linked before the sharing or after the sharing started. So these are linked in there. But really, when you start looking at your system across the tiers, the big questions that should guide this is, what exactly is it that you're trying to impact in terms of student outcomes? Start there, looking at your data, finding out what are the big rocks that we need to move in our school to improve outcomes for students, and also from an equity lens, for which students need different types of supports, and being mindful of being a culturally competent counselor to be able to do that. Because ultimately, the big question that is on all of us is, how do the students benefit from being part of our counseling program? And I'll take a little bit of a bird walk here. That question is one that I also feel like is such a great advocacy tool, is that if we can go to our district and our building leadership teams and say, these are the interventions that I provided, this is how students are benefiting from it, and this is how their outcomes have improved. I think that sends a very different message about the role of a school counselor, different from a guidance counselor, and kind of how we've transitioned from that world to the school counselor world. And we're still fighting that battle. We've been fighting that since I started in this profession back in the 90s. So just being mindful about those two questions there, about what it is that we're trying to improve and how do our students benefit. So hopefully you got some of that brief information. If nothing else, a couple of resources there to find some tiered interventions from some evidence-based sites. So with that, I will turn things back over to Scotty.
Okay, so thank you, Scotty and Dave, for sharing that wealth of information with us today. A couple things we want to talk about what's coming up next. And so, as you all know, the Iowa School Counselors annual conference is coming up November 6th through 8th. It is at Hy-Vee Hall, and I believe you still have time to register. And so we want to make sure that everybody has that. This actually, in your slide deck, this is a link also that to get you to where you need to go to register. So we hope that we will see everybody there. Some of the friends here that we're talking today will actually be presenters as well. So that's pretty exciting. And I'm going to ask Amy, would you like to unmute and come on and talk about what to expect November 11th at our next network?
Sure. Thanks, Jackie. Hello, everybody from Grantwood AEA, where we're here in person today. On November 11th, my partner, Deborah Brokaw, and I will be talking about professional learning. And you might have seen on the flyer that it said highlights from the ISCA conference. There will be some of that, but in a broader lens, we'll be thinking about professional learning as it relates to school counselors, why that's important, why our professional networks are important. And so you can see some of the outcomes that we've identified for that session there. So hoping to see lots of you at the conference, and thanks.
Thank you, Amy. So big things to look forward to in November as well. As we come to a close today, we would like you to go ahead and look at that post survey. As you came in, you did a pre-survey about our 3 learning goals for today. And we would just really like to know if you have enhanced your understanding of today's outcomes and learning objectives. So we were talking about that early warning system, MTSS, and how that relates to you in your role as a school counselor, as well as your understanding of the ASCA standards and MTMD DSS. I'll get it. And so let's just take a quick minute here, if you don't mind, and do the post survey. You can click on the bit.ly there, or you may also scan with your phone. We will give you a couple minutes to do that. All right, so I hope we gave you enough time there to complete your post survey. As we close today, we've shared lots of information in this session, and I want to really thank Dave and Scotty for sharing their expertise and their experience and their knowledge this morning. As we think about going back and going into our districts, I wanted us to think about what picture best fits us about the things that we were able to talk about today. And if you look at picture 1, I was trying to reflect really like we're in this together. I've got a team. I'm ready to get going. We know we have some things that we can improve, but we have some things going, and we are ready to work together for kids. Or you might be feeling like number 2, that you are kind of climbing this huge cliff here, and you might be hanging on all on your own. And so we'd like to know that too, because as a network, we want to be able to come together and support each other. Like you're not on your own. You're not hanging on by a thread there on your own. We can use this network to provide support for each other as well. Where are you at number 3? Like you are just chill. You got this all. We are good. I'm good, I'm relaxed, all is well. So as we close today, we would ask you just to identify in the chat, where are you at? Are you a 1, a 2, or a 3? And you may go ahead and put that into the chat. It's depending on the day, yes. Half-time, we go from, some of us are half-time school counselors, and some of us are solo K-12 counselors, right? And so it's a heavy lift and a different lift for us. So let's network together and find other counselors across the state that are in the same position that we are. 1.5, a 2, 1.5. Great. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. It has been a pleasure to have you on here. We are actually going to finish 10 minutes early, which I think anytime we can give the gift of time, we appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and sign off here. May you all have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you hopefully at the conference November 6th through 8th. And if not, then we'll see you on November 11th. So take care, everyone. We'll see you soon.
Thank you all.